Score marking is a very personal journey for a conductor. It's almost like looking at a diary of learning the work with the layers of notes and notations. It's usually the first step to learning a score, usually your first taste of the work. There are as many different ways to mark a score as there are conductors, and the techniques are usually passed down from conductor to conductor via personal instruction. My name is Dr. Dominique Royam, and I'm a music director, conductor, and music communicator, here to help you achieve a deeper connection to the music you love. Follow me on social media at Dominique Royam for more content. Let's talk about score marking. So let's take a tour of a score without markings, say Beethoven Symphony No. 1. This is the Bärenreiter Urtext edition. And we open it up to the first page, and there's a lot to learn here on the first page. You can tell the title of the symphony is big and bold right there. You have the key of the symphony and the opus number. Sometimes symphonies don't have opus numbers, so they won't have that. And then the dedication on top, or it could be under the name, depending. Then you have the composer over here on the right-hand side. And then you see a lot of music. Each one of these 5-line staves is a different instrument. And so you have something called score order, and all scores are in this order. The woodwinds are atop here, the brass is in the middle, the timpani and the percussion is under the brass, and then the strings are on the bottom. So if you take a look at the things in here, you can see they're bracketed off by type of section, and the bar lines are barred with vertical lines through the sections. So the bar line goes all the way through the string section, so that way you can see the string section as one section at a glance. The same with the horns here and the woodwinds. First thing that you read on a page like this is the tempo marking up here and here above the strings. Adagio molto means very slowly. Molto is very in Italian, adagio is slow. There is no metronome marking here because Beethoven lived before a metronome was really stable and operable. Classical composers and romantic composers didn't have metronome markings because they either lived before the metronome or before the metronome really became something that a musician lived and died by. If we take another score here, Francis Poulenc's Gloria, and open it up to the first page, you can see that he does have a metronome marking right here. It is 60 to the quarter note, and it says maestoso, so that's quarter note equals 60. And if you go into a metronome, mine's on my phone, and you type in 60 and press play, each one of those clicks is quarter note equals 60. When it's 60, that means the quarter note is the same speed as a second, so it goes by just like a second hand would. Now back to the Beethoven. You can see there are letters strewn about the page. Each one of these letters is a dynamic marking that tells you how loud or soft the music needs to be. An F means forte or loud in Italian. The P means piano or soft in Italian. All of these markings are in Italian because marking dynamics and tempo markings and everything happened during the Italian Renaissance, and we just kept the tradition of using Italian markings in scores for hundreds of years. You can also see a crescendo. This little figure right here is a crescendo. You start softly and you get louder. But you also see it here as an abbreviation, CRESC. They mean the same thing. Depending on where you are or what the composer is thinking, they will put either or, they're interchangeable. The other things that are written on the score are pizz for pizzicato, and then arco. These are directions for how to play a stringed instrument. The pizzicato means to pluck the string of the instrument, and arco means to use the bow of the instrument. So you can see the pizzicato here is for the first 3 bars, and then arco comes in for all of the strings here in the 4th bar. The first technique for score marking I used was the color method, taught by Elizabeth Green and popular amongst band composers. I learned it from Franz Krieger at the University of Houston, who was a disciple of Elizabeth Green. Let's take a tour of an old score, one from graduate school, Brahms's Symphony No. 1, the first movement. So you can see immediately that it is very bright in this score. A lot of things are highlighted with different colors of highlighter. You can see the blue here is on the edge of the music, and I do that for each page so that way I can see if there are multiple staves on a page like this one. You would read it this way and then go here and then move to the next page. You can see the tempo marking is in orange. This is above the woodwinds and below the strings instead of above the strings. And then the meter is in pink, and I broke it up depending on the types of instruments. So all the woodwinds are together, all the brass are together, and all the strings are together. I circled some important info on this page, the timpani and the contrabass, because that rhythm at the beginning of the Brahms First Symphony is very, very important to establish the meter as it goes through. And then you can see I put numbers here to tell me which beat these notes change on, because they're not on the designated big beats of the bar. They're on smaller beats, on off beats almost. So I wanted to know exactly when these changed. If we go to the second page, you can see I highlighted some dynamic markings here in red and then in blue, and then over here in red and a big stripe in red, seeing that everyone was coming in fortissimo. And here everyone's coming in piano, which is why it's blue. And then you can see I marked some crescendi and decrescendi here in the strings and the woodwinds sections. Blue for decrescendo, red for crescendo. Now, I didn't go through and do every single one of the dynamic markings through here. You can see there are some decrescendi and crescendi that have no colors in them. If I was doing a true color method of score marking, I would have done all of them. But I was just lazy at this point. You can tell that I've highlighted some important entrances that came in here: the woodwinds, the strings, the woodwinds, the bassoon, the flute, the first violin and the flute at the same time. And then I labeled some instruments over here. So oboe, flute, and cello down there. On this next page, you can see that I have a green stripe here with the repeat sign. So anything that has to do with repeating or going back or doing something multiple times is highlighted in green. You can see I did red stripes again, and then the blue along the edge of the staves. And then I highlighted some lines here in the strings that I find are important. On this page, again, I've highlighted some things. You can see a blue line for piano, a red line for fortissimo, and those blue edge staves again. Now, there are pros and cons to this method. The pros are that it's easy to read at a glance. You look down and you can see what's important: allegro, forte, these instrumental entrances. You can tell without looking at the score too heavily what's most important. It also makes you physically touch touch the score in each one of the dynamic markings and the tempo shifts and the meter changes. And so you physically have to touch every part of the score when you're looking at a score like this. The cons are, it's very time consuming. As you can tell, I didn't do it completely because I was just lazy. Sometimes it makes you feel like you're coloring in an adult coloring book and takes away some of the gravitas from the score itself. And highlighting tends to obscure some of the finer details of the orchestration. It prevents a deeper reading of the score due to a hard time seeing past the highlighting. Like here you have this melody in the first violins, but you don't see this interesting line in the cello that supports that melody in the violins, nor do you see this line in the bassoons that doubles that line in the cello. That's very interesting and is against the main melody. All your eye goes to is what's highlighted there, the main melody for the violin. So I don't use this anymore because I've kind of graduated past it, but it's an acceptable method of score marking. So let's look at another type of score marking. This is the Leonard Bernstein / Mahler method of score preparation. Of course, Leonard Bernstein didn't do exactly what Mahler did, but did take some things from Mahler and the preparation of his scores and brought it into his own personal method. Leonard Bernstein used a red-blue pencil. It would be red on one side and blue on the other, designed for financials, so you could write blue as in positive and red as in negative without having to move pencils. They used the blue-red system where the blue was where the conductor's eye should go, and red was an editorial marking for the orchestra librarians to put into the parts. So let's look at a marked score. This is the first movement of Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra. Bernstein's scores can be found in the New York Philharmonic Leon Levy Digital Archives, where I got this. The clefs over the music are a copyright prevention issue, so you can't just like screen grab all of the parts off of the web and do it without renting the piece, because this is a rental piece. So if we look at this first page, you can see he highlighted just a couple of things because he marked his scores very sparingly. He highlighted this accent here in this first bar because he wants to make sure that the strings play that. Then you see he has these 3 lines in this bar in a parentheses. This is telling him that he wants to beat 3 big beats in this bar. So that's what those 3 lines mean. Each line is a beat that he would conduct on the podium. Going to the second page, you can see there are more lines for how he's going to be beating. Here in this bar, he has 1 big line, so that means he's going to do 1 big downbeat in that bar. And then the next bar, the meter changes, so he has 2 smaller ticks to say that he has 2 smaller beats in that bar. Then the next bar, the meter changes again to 3/8, and he has another 1 stroke, telling us that he's going to conduct 1 in that bar. Then a couple bars later, there's another 2 stroke for a 2/8 bar, and then the next 3/8 bar has another 1 stroke. So this is telling him how to beat these bars in rehearsal. He also has an accent here marked that's really important, especially in the first violins. So he highlighted it by marking it. And he marked the phrases by these half circles, as you can see. So the first one is 3 bars, the second one is 3 bars, the third one is 3 bars. So that way he knows how to phrase each one of these 3 bar segments. Here's the third page of the score that we're going to take a look at, and there are lots of marks on this page. Let's take a look at some of the markings in regular pencil. Here he has a rallentando, or R-A-L-L, circled here, telling him to slow down. Then an a tempo in brackets, telling him to go back to the original tempo, or the first tempo. Then you have the R-A-L-L back here, which tells him to slow down again. And then you have an accelerando marked in the score, but he has a squiggly line right here, so that means we're slowing down a little bit. And I guess he just didn't like the accelerando all the way through where it was marked. He also marked in both blue and red. This rallentando was marked in red and then marked out in blue. So he changed his mind about this, and the blue marking is for his eye to go directly towards that during performance. You have an odd tempo marked right here in red, so that way he can see it. And he highlighted some instruments here, horn and then viola, and he marked the forte for viola to make sure that they come in forte. Then he marked the first violins and the violas again here in red. He marked the violas again because here you have first violins, second violins, violas, and on this stave you have first violins, violas. So you're missing the second violin, so it changes. So this way he doesn't mistake that for the second violins. My personal score markings are a conglomeration of techniques I've learned throughout my career. I took the techniques that worked the best for me and melded them into a personal score marking technique perfectly fitted to the way I read scores. My markings fall into three categories. One, the physical aspects of the score, like phrase markings and phrase shape, instrumental entrances, and conducting meters. Two, notes from researching and learning the score, like historical tidbits that influence interpretation or that make good program notes, scoring, instrumentation, blending, or other issues I noticed during study. And three, theoretical marks, like the tonality and the chord structure. I learned most of this from Robert Franz, the associate conductor of the Houston Symphony and the music director and conductor of the Windsor Symphony Orchestra in Windsor, Canada. I'll leave a link to his website in the description box below. So before we get into a full score, I wanted to show you how I mark a score on some plain paper with a marker, so that way you can see it more clearly. So instruments are labeled by abbreviations, except when they're not. Not all of the instruments are labeled by abbreviations, but the woodwinds and the brass usually are. So for flute, I would write FL and give it a nice circle. For oboe, it's OB and a nice circle. Clarinet is CL. And bassoon is FG. That's for fugato, or the Italian term for the bassoon. Now we go to the brass section. Horn is HN. Trumpet is TRP. Trombone is TBN. And tuba is TBA. That A and the N difference is very important there. Now, for percussion, I label it with a mix of pictures and abbreviations. I got this from my graduate student days from Franz Krager at the University of Houston. So timpani is a nice little picture of a timpani, and there's usually an arrow to go with it. The triangle is a triangle. The symbol is different depending on what kind of symbol it is. If it's crash symbols that go together like this, it's two lines with two lines coming off. So those are the things you hold the symbols by and you go crash. A suspended symbol is one line. It's an upside down T because you're suspending that symbol. Bass drum is BD. Tam-tam is two T's with one top, so they're together. And tambourine is TAMB. Now, the strings are completely different, and this is what I really got from Robert Franz from the Windsor Symphony. The violin 1 and violin 2, mimicking like they are on the staves of the orchestra score, are in a bracket. If for some reason the violins aren't playing together and you need to mark one instead of the other, you do half a bracket. So downward for violin 1 or upward for violin 2. Viola's a scratch mark, and then cello bass is kind of like violin 1 and violin 2. It's a big half circle in them together because they usually play together, but if they're not, you can do the top of the half circle or the bottom of the half circle to differentiate the cello and the bass. Now, Robert Franz also taught me how to mark phrases in a score. It's using a division mark because there's nothing in music that looks like that. And so you know very specifically that that number that you put under the division sign is for how many bars the phrase is long. So you would put the length of the phrase in there like that. Subphrases are little additions. So you put the subphrase plus the second half of the subphrase, and that would go directly under the division sign. So this would be a complete phrase diagram. So it's an 8-bar phrase with 2 4-bar subphrases. Now, phrase direction, which is, I was trained in determining phrase direction by Mark and Thacker, is a triangle type thing where the apex is the climax of the phrase. And so you would go through the music up until the climax and then come away. So that way you can see where the energy is going. So the energy would go up and then come back away, depending on where your climax is. Now, for conducting meters, I use a different technique from another conductor, this time my very first conducting teacher, Robert Linder. He taught me this. It's also what Bernstein uses, so we saw a little bit of it. Measures can be divided into eighth notes, and those eighth notes can be grouped in 2 ways, either with 2 eighth notes for a division or 3 eighth notes for a division. So when you have 2 eighth note long divisions, you have a short line. When you have a division that's 3 eighth notes long, you do a long line. So if you have a bar that's, say, 2/8 long, it's got 2 eighth notes in it, you just put a short line over it. 6/8 can be divided in 2 ways, either 2 3 eighth note sections or 3 2 eighth note sections, so depending on how you play it. And then 5/8 is a 3 eighth note division and a 2 eighth note division together, and depending on which one is first, you can have 2 different symbols. If the 3 is first, you put the long one first. If the 2 is first, you put the short one first. Now let's go into a score so I can show you how this works. Now let's go, this is Igor Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring. This is the Ritual of Abduction movement, and I'll move to pencil for the score. You can see how the meter changes in every single bar in the score because that's just Stravinsky. So here you have a 4/8 bar, so that means you have 4 eighth notes in it divided into 2 sections of 2 eighth notes, so you have 2 short lines. The next measure is 5/8, so there's a division of 3 and a division of 2, and the division of 3 is first, so you have the long line and then a short line for the 2. The next bar is 6/8, so you have 2 3/8 divisions in here, so you have 2 long lines. Then you have 5/8 again, so you have a long line and a short line. Then a small tiny bar of 2/8, so that gets 1 short line. Then you have the 6/8 again broken up into 2 sections, so it's 2 long lines. Then you have 3/4, which is 3 subdivisions of 2 eighth notes each. So you have 3 short lines there. So as you can see, when you're looking at the score, you know exactly where the long beats are, even though you're changing your beat length every bar. Let's mark a score together. So we'll go back to Beethoven Symphony No. 1 in C. And so the most important thing about the beginning of this is the tonality of the first 3 bars. So I would mark it in here at the bottom. So first one's a C7 to F major, but it's not fully tonicized, so I would put it in parentheses. If you want to know more about tonicizations, whether fully or partial, I would go and check out Mark Ann Thacker's class, Making Beautiful Music. He does it online over Zoom, so just see when he has his next class coming up. So the next bar we have is G7 to A minor. Major is capitalized, minor is in lowercase, and then you put a line over the M in minor so you know it's a lowercase m. It's not fully tonicized, so I'd put it in parentheses. Then the next bar is D7 and then G, and this is fully tonicized because we get all of the notes for G in this bar, so it would be parentheses. So I would circle the pizzicato markings for everybody and then the arco markings for everybody so I know what was going on. Now, if we weren't on the first page, I would label all of the instruments that come in and hold, but because we're on the first page of the score, they're already labeled, so I don't actually have to do anything for that. The first and second violins have the theme here in the 4th bar, so I'm going to bracket it. And then I'm going to highlight where the other string players come in. I'm going to put in the instruments here to mark their out entrances. See, the bassoons come in at 2 different points, which is really important. So I'm marking the oboe and the flute when they all come in. And then that's that page done. So we go on to the next page. Here, the timpani's coming in. This is the first time the timpani's coming in, so I'll want to give him a cue. So I highlight that. We have a crescendo here, so I'm going to circle that so that way I know it's a crescendo. Here's a crescendo as well, so I'm going to put in the symbol for crescendo so that way I know. And then out of all of this, these horn notes are the ones that move the most. So they're going to pop out and I'm going to want to give them a cue, so I'm going to put horn there. And then this is running up to us in C major, so all of the strings are there, so I'm going to mark all of the strings. It's piano, so I'm going to put the dynamic marking and circle it so that way I know it's piano. Then we're in a confirmed C major, so I put that down there. And the first violins have the theme, so I'm going to do half a bracket here so that way we know. Then I'm going to put in the instruments here as they come in, so that way I don't have to read to the end of the page. The strings come in with this important little tidbit, so I'm going to bracket that out. Now onto this page, I'm going to label the instruments as they come in, so that way I can give them a cue. And then see how the strings add to the first violin, so I'm going to highlight that by putting in our brackets, and then the bassoon also does that. Same thing here. And then the violas and the cello basses add in here, so I'm going to bracket that off as well. So after all of these notes, the first and second violins have the theme, so I'm going to bracket them. Here's the timpani coming in again after a pause, so I'm going to highlight that. And oh, this entrance from the timpani I didn't highlight, so we're gonna do that as well. Now looking at it, we have this additive again from the winds and the lower strings, so I'm gonna bracket off that when it happens. Flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and then because it happens less than a bar later, I'm just going to bracket it like this, so that way I know they also come in. The melody goes down to the lower strings here, so I'm going to bracket that off, and again when it happens, and it goes from lower strings to woodwind, so I'm going to label them when they come in. So that way I know it goes from here to there, to there, to there, to there. And then there, we're to the second statement. So that's kind of how I mark a score the first time I've seen it. Now, a marked score is not a fully learned score. So you go through a score multiple times, you play it out on the piano, you listen to various recordings, and you get the music into your body and into your soul. And when you do that, you go through this investigative journey to really understand the work. So I want to show you a fully marked up and fully learned score. This is Beethoven 9. Let's go ahead and take a bit of the fourth movement here. So you can tell that there's a lot going on in this score. It has notes on the top and the sides and the bottom because I've written things in here based on what I've learned. So let's take a tour. So first off, we have the phrase marking here up at top. You have the phrase direction that goes from the first note and climaxes here at the end, so that way I know the phrase goes all the way to the end of the phrase. Then I have the bottom note marked out so I know where to balance from. I have a balance note here in the brass because the trumpets will play really loud because they're marked fortissimo with 2 Fs, and so they'll overblow and you need to balance this out with the winds. It's in 3, so I know what meter I'm conducting in. We have the note of the harmony here. And then this A and this A are markings for phrases for a large phrase diagram that would have AABA or something like that. You have a note on the rhythmic instability throughout all of this, so that is important through this. And then you have a couple notes about research that I've done. So Wagner called this the horror fanfare, so I put it in here with the German notation for it, which I won't pronounce for you. I marked that it's a set of variations, that this note is held over from the adagio, so even though there's this big space here, the tonality has to be the same going from one place to another. Then I have a note here about joy that I got from a Beethoven text, so overall about this movement. Let's move on. So this is the first recit. We have our phrase number up here. You have a note on what the recit does from another analyzation of it. You have a balance note here. The VC are supported by the double basses. You have a couple of notes on links to what it is. You have the phrase structure here, so it crescendos to there, and that's the climax, and then it comes away. You have the horn and the timpani that come in before everyone else. And then you have the horror fanfare again with the phrase marking. This one climaxes in the middle, so that's really important to know. So you go to here with the energy and then start bringing it back. Then I have the intersection of the horror fanfare and the cello basses here, highlighted by the circle. Moving on, phrase, phrase, phrase. I have the exact measure numbers. This is a quote from the first movement. I have highlighted this is the theme from the first movement. I have harmonics down here so that way I know. And then I've bracketed off the entrance of the cello and the basses. Again, I bracketed off the entrance of the cello and the basses here. Another page of recit. I have the location of this quote in exact bar numbers, and it's from the scherzo, theme from movement 2. I bracketed off the recit beginning, and then the text of the recit as told by Beethoven in one of his letters. Again, the exact quote bars of this material from the third movement, phrases, phrases. I've highlighted some of the woodwinds that come in that accompany this recit in the cello basses. And then here's that Beethoven quote again. Again, I highlight when the winds come in at the end of the cello bass recit. And so I have my phrase diagrams. Again, here we have a subphrase that's 4 bars, 3 bars, 4 bars. And you can see I've tick marked it out so I know what's going on. I've marked that this is the joy theme, but it's incomplete. I have harmony notes down here at the bottom. I've highlighted the woodwinds that are playing this theme because the flutes aren't in there, and only 1 oboe and 1 clarinet, but both bassoons. And then the horns come in with a drone. The other horns come in here, and I have that labeled along with the timpani. And so I have the exact words from Beethoven's letter about this recit, and then the cadence in D major. And so you can see there's a lot more information in this fully realized, fully learned score than would be in a score that I marked in my first go through. Thank you for joining me in this video about score marking. If you'd like to learn more about score marking, I suggest contacting a local conducting teacher who can teach you all you need to know. I've had some wonderful conducting teachers and mentors throughout my career, and I'm privileged that they imparted just some of their talent and intellect upon me. The ones I mentioned in this video are Robert Linder, Robert Franz, and Mark-Ann Thacker. I'll link their websites below. Also, read the book Looking for the Harp Quartet, An Investigation into Musical Beauty by Mark-Ann Thacker. A link to it will be in the description box below. I document my score study in videos called Score Study with Me. They're in fast motion with lo-fi music playing, so you can just study along with me or just watch how I mark a particular score. I'll link the playlist in the eye and down below. Like this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more. What do you want to learn about next? Leave me a comment down below. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. These videos take over 20 hours of research to complete, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. The bibliography for this video can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on my social media, so follow me for more updates. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.